Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Richard Costley. I am a member of the People's Power Assembly. Let me start by welcoming our guests who are here to speak to us and the guests who are here in the audience. Welcome. Normally on Wednesdays at this time and in this space, we have a convening of the People's Power Assemblies where we review and the recent period and plan for involvement in future events. The PPA participates in many grassroots activities, principally but not exclusively in the Black Lives Movement. We participate in the immigrant rights struggle and the anti-fascist movement against police violence and incarceration, as well as other issues. We were part of an amazing contingent at New York City Pride this summer. Pride is under attack, and we have to defend it. You can find us at May Day celebration every year as well, but you'd probably expect to find us there. Like all of you here, our ambition is to change the world, and there is no shortage of issues to address. Our meetings regularly include an educational component where a member or guest gives a presentation on a topic of interest, followed by a discussion of that issue. As examples, this past summer we had an amazing educational by Ori from International Concerned Friends of Mumia Abu Jamal. The presentation was on Mumia and on the MOVE organization, and it was magnificent. We had a presentation on the struggle in South Africa over university fees or tuition, as we say here. It was delivered by a South African activist and scholar who we met at the Women's March here in New York City. Small world. If you are local or just in town on a Wednesday, you're welcome to join us here at 7 as we meet to plan how to intervene in the struggle. This is not a PPA meeting tonight. As most, if not all of you know, there was an important and successful tribunal here in New York this past weekend to put the United States on trial for its colonial crimes against Puerto Rico. As such, there are many friends in town from around the country, and a request was made of us to allow this meeting tonight. As today works best for the folks visiting. We are happy to accede to this request and look forward to the program. The subject of this meeting is an important one because of the interconnectedness of things that sometimes seem far apart. I will now turn the mic over to Sade Swift, who will share this meeting and also introduce the speakers. Thank you, and welcome again.
Thank you for that welcome. And I want to thank the Solidarity Center for hosting us, BAP, Black Alliance for Peace, Black is Back Coalition, and United National Anti-War Coalition. Thank you for sponsoring us. So why are we here? End the Wars at Home and Abroad is part of the Anti-War Autumn Event Series, which is aimed to raise issues around war, militarization, imperialism, and more of those things with people just like you. The continuous and never-ending wars abroad have contributed to the militarization of the U.S. borders, communities, and the entire country. Important reforms that have been fought for by generations of activists are under attack by both major political parties. It is by understanding we have a common enemy that we can build a mass movement to fight back. A little bit about Black Alliance for Peace. Black Alliance for Peace is a people-centered human rights project against war, repression, and imperialism. The Black Alliance for Peace seeks to recapture and redevelop the historic anti-war, anti-imperialist, and pro-peace positions of the radical Black movement. Through educational activities, organizing, and movement support, organizations and individuals in the Alliance will work to oppose both militarized domestic state repression and the policies of destabilization, subversion, and the permanent war agenda of the U.S. state globally. This event is also a continuation of the launch of Shutdown AFRICOM, which is part of the campaign to close all U.S. foreign bases. So now to introduce our amazing speakers, who will give a 10-minute remark each, and then there will be a Q&A after. So first, I'll start off with Joe Lombardo, who is the co-coordinator of UNAC, a coalition of anti-war and social justice organizations in the United States. He is a frequent commentator on several progressive TV and radio programs. Joel was a staff person for the National Peace Action Coalition, one of the two major anti-war coalitions in the U.S. that organized against the Vietnam War. He is a longtime labor activist, a member of CSEA Local 999, and a delegate to the Troy Area Labor Council. Help me welcome Joe.
Let me know when it gets close. Okay, let me know when I'm close, all right?
Okay.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here again tonight. As was mentioned, I'm the co-coordinator of UNAC, United National Anti-War Coalition, which is a coalition of about 160 groups, peace, social justice organizations throughout the country, including the groups that are represented on the panel here tonight. UNAC was started in 2010 at a conference of around 800 people up in Albany, New York. Strange place for a conference, but it's where I live, so it was good that way for me. One of the reasons we formed at that point is because the anti-war movement was kind of collapsing around us. It collapsed once we saw Barack Obama come into office. A lot of people thought the war was going to end with Obama, that now the Democrats were in and things would change. But those of us who have been organizing for a while sometimes have characterized the Democratic Party as the graveyard of movements, and it certainly was the graveyard of the anti-war movement as a movement that was strong in the beginning of the century, in the beginning of the period after Iraq in particular, dissolved, and UNAC came on the scene to try to keep it going because we knew the wars were going, and the wars, in fact, have expanded and extended. The title of that conference was End the Wars at Home and Abroad. It wasn't a title that was used a lot back then. I mean, the idea was there, but it wasn't used. And now it's pretty much used by everybody in the anti-war movement. It's a very important achievement. We understood it in Albany, and part of the reason that our conference was in Albany is because the Muslim community in Albany was under attack, and this was part of the War on Terror, which was the excuse for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and since. They don't use it so much anymore, that terminology, but that's what it was. What had happened in Albany was the FBI went into various mosques, and one in particular, an inner-city mosque, low-income people, and they sent an FBI agent into the mosque who pretended to be a member of the mosque and tried to frame people up. He tried to get someone to take a loan because his pizza business was going under, and he did certain things that made it look like there was laundering of money going on with this loan, and he had told other people that he wanted to use some of the money that was being laundered for some missile or something of that sort. It was a total setup, and 2 people were arrested. The Albany community and the peace community came behind them, and that's why it was important that we met in Albany. We came behind them in a strong way. They were each sentenced to 15 years in jail. One of them, the imam of that particular mosque, got out last month after 13 years in jail. We've kept the movement going for that whole time. We meet at the mosque on a monthly basis. We've had demonstrations. We commemorate the days of their arrest and so forth. We've kept it going that whole time, but we expanded it. We helped build into a national organization that looked at the attacks on Muslims throughout the whole country. And there have been, by the government's own admission, hundreds, they say 600, we think it's more, hundreds of Muslims that were arrested in these sting operations, these preemptive sting operations, where basically they did nothing. But they were framed, they were entrapped, they were bribed, they were something to get after these Muslims. And this helped stoke the idea of a war on terror so they can conduct these wars at home, abroad. And this was part of the war at home as we understood it. In Albany, the guy they sent into the mosque was someone that they had watched for a while. He was a Pakistani who was doing some illegal activity. He was selling illegal licenses to people. And when they had him on something like 98 cases of selling these licenses, they came to him and said, "You're going to jail for a long time, then we're going to deport you back to Pakistan unless you help us out." So he agreed to stab his fellow Muslims in the back. He agreed to help them out, and he went into these mosques, first the Albany Mosque, set people up so that they can bring cameras and say, "You see, we have homegrown terrorists, and this is what we have to do." And that there's a direct line from that to Trump's Muslim ban and so many of the other things that we're seeing today. This man then went to Newburgh Mosque, did a similar thing. He tried to bribe some very poor Muslims and help me bomb this Jewish synagogue in Riverdale up north from here. And they said, "No, we're not going to do that." And he said, "Well, you know, we got to do this. Jews are bad," all this kind of stuff, over and over, until finally he said, "I'll give you each $5,000. And they said, "No, we're not going to do it." Eventually it got up to $250,000. And these four men spoke to themselves and said, "Okay, this guy's going to give us this money. Let's tell him yes, but we won't do it." And he said, "Well, you have to go and you have to set the bomb and you have to do all this kind of stuff. And once it's done, I'll give you the money." So they went down to Riverdale to this temple with a bomb in the car, and they told him, he had told them what they had to do to arm this bomb. It was a bomb the FBI gave them. And they decided they were going to make it look like they were doing it, but they never armed the bomb. But as soon as they walked away from the car where this bomb was, they were arrested. They're spending the rest of their lives in jail. There's an HBO movie about that case. He then went out to Pittsburgh. He did a similar thing. And there's another movie called Terror, with T in brackets to show error, where it talks about how he set up some people in Pittsburgh and who knows how many other places. But they gave him a lot of money. And what he did with that money was he bought a limousine company, used cars that were not very roadworthy, that couldn't pass inspections. He used people that didn't have licenses to drive these cars. And you might have heard of the case that happened in Albany about a month or so ago, where one of his cars was driving 20 people. It crashed and killed them all. That is the war coming home. This person should have not been able to do that. It was FBI money to do it. The FBI is complicit in that. All of this stuff is racism. It's racism. Racism is behind every war. There's racism when they militarize the border, and now they're sending people out there. The war is coming home because of what U.S. policy has been. We have refugees coming up through Mexico. People have come because of U.S. wars, refugees into Europe. It's happening that's the war coming home too. Wars don't stay overseas, they come home. The racism and militarization of the police, programs like Stop and Frisk, that's the war also coming home. This country has never dealt with racism. When I was at an anti-NATO protest recently, I spoke to some people in Germany. And they said, you know, in Germany, after World War II, it was mandatory that everybody have a course in their schools. It's mandatory in all their schools on Nazism and anti-Semitism, so they could learn about what happened. They do not have roads and statues of the Nazi figures in their country. If you want to say it's part of our history, you put it in a museum. But we never dealt with racism or the legacy of slavery or of white supremacy in this country, except for a very brief period after the Civil War, which was known as Radical Reconstruction, when some of the legislators in the South were taken over primarily by blacks, And some of the best legislation that this country has ever seen came from those legislators. Public schools, public transportation, graduated tax systems, anti-discrimination laws. But when they saw that, they pushed back. They brought in the Klan. They stopped the voting process down there. They instituted Jim Crow. And racism has never been dealt with. Today, if a black goes to a court in many of the southern states, he has to pass a statue of a Confederate person. Drive on a road named after a Confederate person that doesn't think they should have any human rights at all, in fact, don't even think they're human. That's what we have in this country, that racism. And that racism has been used in every war. How they dehumanize the people we go against, call them gooks or ragheads or whatever. And that racism is what we see that stokes the right-wing Trump movement today, that is responsible for the things we've seen in the last week, for the bombings, for the killings that took place in Pittsburgh, and the killing that you don't hear about that took place outside of Kentucky, where a white man walked up and killed 2 blacks. It went out in a parking lot, saw a white, and the white said, "Wait, don't shoot me." So, I don't shoot whites. I only shoot blacks. That's the endemic racism and white supremacy that exists. And then Trump gets up at one of his meetings and says, "I'm a nationalist." At that meeting, it's understood what that means. That means white nationalist. That's exactly what it means. So the anti-war movement is opposed to the wars abroad and the wars at home, and they are connected. And when we make that connection and understand that connection, and we support the struggles, and they come together, and we understand that our enemy is the same enemy, and racism, imperialism are connected. When we understand that, we will build an anti-war movement. We will build a left in the United States. We will build a movement that can confront the racism and white supremacy in the United States. And that's what we are trying to do. So I urge you all to join us in that effort. Now, I just want to mention before I end, there's 3 things coming up as part of this anti-war autumn that you should know about. Not this weekend, but the following weekend in D.C., Trump was going to have a military parade. Could you imagine that? It was canceled. But, when a country like North Korea holds a military parade, they are saying to the United States, "Don't attack us because we can fight back." When the United States does it, it says, "Don't oppose us or we will smash you." And but we organized 260 groups or something like that signed a letter saying we are going to be there to oppose him. Nobody gave him support, and he canceled it. But we will be there because we're not canceling the anti-war movement. So if you'd like to join us that weekend in D.C., see me and I'll give you the details. The following weekend, we are going to be in Dublin, because we're going to have a conference against military bases. We're going to make connections with people from countries all around the world. Some of the people in this room will be there. And there will be people from 35 countries right now who will be there. A group of about 50 of us are going from the United States. Cheap flights from New York. I urge you to join us. If you're interested in that, come and see me. But now Trump has announced that NATO's coming to D.C. in this spring, and they're going to have a meeting on April 4th. April 4th was the day that Martin Luther King was killed. It's not a coincidence that he did it on that day, in my opinion. But it gives us an opportunity. It gives us an opportunity to make a reality between the connection between the anti-war movement and the Black liberation and civil rights movements, and bring these 2 movements together to oppose NATO and to oppose racism in this country. And that's what we're going to do. We've already have some permits, and you'll hear more about it. I urge you all to join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Maurice Carney, who is one of the co-founders of Friends of Congo and currently serves as the organization's executive director. He has worked with Congolese for over 15 years in their struggle for peace, justice, and human dignity. Give him a hand.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure and honor to be here with you tonight to share, to some extent, what's unfolding on the African continent and the role, the destructive role that the United States has played throughout the continent that may not be readily evident to even some of the keenest observers. And I would like to shed some light and provide a glimpse into the tremendous pain and suffering that African people have experienced as a result of a callous foreign policy that one can argue seems to seek out revolutionaries, freedom fighters, and not only destroy them, but fundamentally dismantle any kind of foundation they've built to pursue independence on the African continent. Some of us, about a year ago, came to understand or became aware of U.S. military presence on the African continent because 4 U.S. soldiers were killed in Niger, in West Africa. However, that was just a tip of the iceberg. This year, October, is the 10th anniversary of AFRICOM. And those of you who have followed the Black Alliance for Peace, seen an accounting of what U.S. militarization has wrought on the continent for the past decade or so. I'll touch upon that a little bit, where since 2008, when George Bush, Donald Rumsfeld established the Africa Command with an initial intent to establish bases on the continent, but was roundly rejected by almost all African leaders except for one. Liberia's leader, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, was the one African leader that invited the U.S., said, come, you can establish a base here on the African continent. So, in spite of the wholesale rejection of the Africa Command, the moment President Obama got into office, even though he didn't create it, he accelerated it. And he was able to do it in a fashion, I would argue, that President Bush couldn't have. Black president of the United States, people not being too critical, seen as a friend of Africa. So he was given far more latitude. And of all the things that Africa needs, at least, I could list 100 things that Africa needs, a continent. And military assistance and military presence, U.S. military presence, wouldn't come in that top 100. Nonetheless, since President Obama got in office, U.S. military presence on the continent had accelerated to a point of grown almost 2,000%. Although there weren't bases other than what we find in Djibouti, the military footprint with special operations forces, with drones, lily pads as they call them, training, you find it almost all of the African continent. Dozens of African countries served as a space for U.S. presence. Now, U.S. would say that they're on the continent in an effort to fight terrorism. However, when the United States joined up with NATO in 2011 with the French and Sarkozy and undertook regime change in Libya, what that did was it accelerated terrorists on the continent. It increased the number of terrorists. What it did was weapons that were in Libya were now being found in the area that they call the Sahel, in Niger and Chad and the surrounding countries to Libya. And then the United States make the argument, well, we need to go after the terrorists, even to the point where French troops had to go into Mali at one point to confront the terrorists. So, if anything, the U.S. presence has been an accelerator of terrorism on the continent and not a deterrent. In fact, wherever they go, we see an increase in terrorism, even though the rationale is not tenable, that they're there to fight terrorists. U.S. is on the African continent to protect its strategic interests. The Chinese expanding their presence on an economic front, and neither Europe nor the United States can compete with the Chinese economically. However, the great equalizer is the U.S. military. So they're on the continent to protect their military interests and also secure access to strategic minerals and resources. Mineral resources that are vital to the functioning not only of their technology industries and the electronics industries, but aerospace industries, but particularly military industry. The African scholar Ali Mazrui, who wrote a book called The Africans, he had quipped at one point that if the Congo were to cease its export of cobalt, the entire NATO flotilla would be grounded, because cobalt was that vital to the military industry. Now, with the U.S. military presence, with its hard power on the continent that is below the radar, there's another even more insidious presence that the U.S. has on the African continent that has wrought a great deal of devastation. And this is the support of what some people call strong men or friendly tyrants. So instead of the United States, this is even before AFRICOM, instead of the United States having its a strong, broad military or troop presence, what it does is it supports these strong men, and people such as Yoweri Museveni, for example, in Uganda. And what they do is they provide them with military training, and provide them with arms, provide them with intelligence, and then these leaders use the tools that they receive from the United States to invade other countries. They use the tools that they receive from the United States to suppress their own population, therefore clamping down on any kind of resistance that we see on the African continent, trying to bring about change in whether it's in Uganda or Rwanda, the Congo itself. And probably the best example of the devastating role that the United States support of these strong men or these proxy forces has wrought is in the case of the Congo. In 1996, the Rwandan government, the Ugandan government invaded the Congo with the backing of the United States. And as a result of that 96 invasion and a second invasion in 1998, an estimated 6 million Congolese lost their lives. And in those invasions, the United States not only provided military aid and financing and intelligence and equipment and training, but when these invaders were brought to bed at the international level, the United States would run diplomatic and political interference so that they wouldn't be held accountable. So this kind of support that we see being provided to these leaders, some of the most backward, sociopathic leaders that you can find on the African continent, has been really an obstacle for advancement on the continent as a whole. If we look at Uganda, for example, and okay, we have Uganda and we got to wrap up. Uganda and Rwanda, for example. Rwanda has received about $1 billion over the last decade or so in U.S. military assistance. When Obama first came into office, when he was inaugurated in 2009, there was a huge shipment of military equipment to the Rwandan government that was subsequently used to destabilize the Congo. Seeing that we have to bring it to a close, one of the key things that we can do, or several key things that we can do, one is to learn more about what's unfolding on the continent and the role that the United States is playing in terms of arming these strong men on the continent. Two, these strong men who are suppressing their population, the social justice movements that are found in these countries, we need to reach out to them in solidarity and support them by amplifying their stories, by providing them with access to platforms so that they can share with you the struggles that they're waging and the role not only that their leaders are playing, but the role that the United States is playing to support those leaders who are suppressing the population. So in the question and answer, we'll get into more as to how we can be engaged in supporting social movements on the continent. But just to conclude that it's about time that we pull away the veils, so to speak, of the role that the United States has been playing in supporting strong men on the continent, in preventing progress on the continent because of its foreign policy and its military policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Lisa Davis, who is a longtime community activist and who is the vice chair of the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations, and is the chair of its Healthcare Working Group. Please welcome Lisa.
Good evening, everyone. I always enjoy coming to the International Action Center because I'm among friends. And many of you I've had the chance to work with very, very closely. And I'm also glad to see that there are a lot of faces here that I don't really know, a lot of younger faces, because it is so important. It is so important to take what is going on personally, to take it literally, and to walk like the world depends on you individually. Walk with it on your shoulders. Carry it on your shoulders. We must do that. People are being murdered. People are dying. Generations are suffering and being destroyed, while people over here, too many people over here, get to go to sleep at night and not give a shit. And doing it with these dollars over here. So it must be personal. We must move like if we don't get up and do something, that it will be our fault personally that things did not change. But of course we know we must move collectively, but we have to walk like that. We must. I am with the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. And we were founded, I shouldn't just say in response to the election of Barack Hussein Obama, but that was certainly one of the motivations for it. But definitely there were so many other things that were going on, and people felt that it was time that we really stood up. And the name Black is Back was chosen specifically to honor and to own the tradition of the Black liberation struggle in this country, which has been one of the most righteous struggles, has a history unparalleled, to many of the other struggles. And definitely whenever we talk about liberation, whenever we talk about what is right, whenever we talk about any of those things in this country, whenever we talk about any so-called right that anybody has, you cannot not talk about the African liberation struggle. And so we chose or the name was chosen, the Black is Back Coalition, to honor that, but also to basically give notice that we were not going to mince what was going on. We were not going to, for lack of a better word, sort of do a kumbaya stuff, because too much was happening. We wanted to rip the veil off, so to speak. We wanted to say no more. We must talk about what is going on here. We must develop the political maturity to talk about it, and have to do it. Can't be so worried about political correctness or niceness when the wars that are happening, not just abroad, but right here on these grounds, on this soil, these wars that continued, that never stopped, This country has never, ever been forced to, this government has never, ever been forced to examine itself thoroughly, and it requires, well, it doesn't require, I should say, but it should happen, that white America, or white people all over the world, really, because it wasn't just an American thing that happened, but that they look at themselves. And there's not going to be any way around that. There's not going to be any way around that at all. Peace does not just mean the absence of dropping bombs or murdering people. That is not peace, although we do want that to happen. But it has to be much more than that, because you can have a lot of wars. There are so many wars, and you don't necessarily even have to fire a shot. But you do it through your policies, through your economics, through creating systems that are absolutely untenable, that rob people of their essence, their lives, their everything. And that is what the current system that we are faced with right now, the system of white, racist, colonialist power. And we must deal with that openly up front, and we must root it out. We must destroy it, but we must also examine what we are talking about. We're not talking, when we talk about getting rid of that, we're not talking about putting a black face or a Latino face or anything like that on a corrupt, thoroughly despicable system. We're not talking about that. We must definitely move to a systems analysis. That is very, very important. A system analysis in which we examine every aspect of what was, given to us. And many of us, unfortunately, at least I also speak for myself on this, when we talk about that, when we talk about, well, we have to bring capitalism down, how many of us really have an idea in our head in terms of what it would look like without this system of capitalism, what it would be replaced with? But these are the things that we must fight. These are the things that we must absolutely make clear that we are talking about. We must repeat it over and over and over again. Revolution, socialism, destruction of a bloodthirsty, horrific system called capitalism, in which this country was based upon, in which Europe founded its riches upon. They founded their riches upon the destruction and mutilation of people, and primarily people of color. We cannot walk away from that. We cannot at all walk away from that. So this is the situation that we find ourselves in today, and we find that this country seeks to do in the area that is called the Middle East. I'll just use that word for right now. But I heard somebody one time just put it so truthfully. They seek to do over there what they did to the indigenous people here and to African people. They seek to do that over there. And we must stand up. We must fight strongly. We must stop it. We must fight with everything. We must fight in deed and in word and thought process. We must absolutely do that. And we must bring it home. We must bring it home. What is going on to everybody who walks around in this country? We must make it personal to them. It's almost like if they don't show a dead body being blown up, doesn't mean a war is not going on. 17 years of overt war, and today it's not even an issue with the elections coming up. It's not even anything anybody is really demanding in terms of people's position on the war. The Republicans and the Democrats both equally pro-war. And in fact, people can say all this stuff about Trump, and everything that I've heard them say about him is true. I take nothing away from that. But, you know, I can talk about them both, the Republicans and the Democrats, and speak the truth about them. But when he does something with war, when he bombs somebody, when he bombs a country, or when he asks for the largest increase ever in the military budget, there is not a sound coming from the Democrats. There is nobody talking about, not the media or anything like that, although this man is, you know, considered a deranged maniac, and I'm not speaking against that. I think it's true. But they say nothing. They say nothing about that at all. So I'm just going to talk about a few things. I see the 1 minute sign. It goes so fast. It really goes so fast when you're up here. But one of the things I'm going to just bring out just some ideas in terms of, okay, what can we actually do? Because I know I'm here preaching to the choir. But here are some of the things that we must begin to do. We must begin to demand how many people have been killed in these current wars. The people that are being attacked are a nothingness. They don't count for anything. They have been reduced to nothingness by this country. Maybe they might be referenced as collateral damage. That's not good enough. We in the anti-war movement should be demanding every single day. We want to hear from this government. We want answers. We don't just want the number of, Americans who were killed. We want the numbers, period. How many people have you been killing? They matter. They count. And you will no longer dismiss that at all. We should begin to re-examine or maybe talk about the utter hypocrisy of people who seem like they are just so pro-war. They don't care. They don't care because it's not their families going over there. And I remembered when the war first happened, and I saw something in the Black Agenda report, and I can't remember exactly who was calling for it, so I won't try to quote any names, but it seemed like somebody was saying there should be a draft, and I remember thinking, oh, no, we can't have that. No way at all. And I know that the rhetoric was that if you make it personal to people, which a draft will make it personal, they're not going to sit up. These wars will not go on so long. And basically, that's the gist of what they were saying. And I remembered at that time thinking, oh, no way, we can't have a draft come on. Because I just assumed that people would be so outraged about the war and that there would be such a growing demand to end these wars. But I was wrong. And now there's silence. Now there's just nothing because people over here get to eat their breakfast and go to sleep at night, and they just don't give a shit about it. Many of them, will just swallow the thing about American exceptionalism, which is as racist as any other term that you could possibly use. But I think we got to begin to raise that issue. I think we have to begin to say, if you're going to be so pro-war, how dare you think that you can sit up there and not have to worry about, well, they're dropping bombs on other people overseas. How dare you think that you don't have to pay for some of that? You believe in it so much, then make your families go. And I think we have to reconsider the issue of the draft because this is just unfair. It's insufferable. What's it going to take to stop it? And I know that's not a very popular position, but we have to I think we need to talk about that in those terms, because if you had a draft and you thought your children were going to be going over there, you'd be talking about ending it. And how dare you think that you don't have to put anything towards something like this? How dare you think that it's all right for other people to die for something evidently you believe in? So, I want to just close with a couple of events that are happening this Saturday and Sunday, November 3rd and 4th. The Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations will be in D.C., and we will be having our annual march on the White House. Our position is that there is no peace. Africa and Africans are at war. U.S. to the world, comply or die. We will be meeting in Malcolm X Park at 12 o'clock on November 3rd, and we will have a rally in the park, and then we will be marching to the White House, and we ask that you join us. I realize that there's a lot going on, but these are the times. We should be in Washington, D.C. every weekend marching on the White House. It's that important. And then on Sunday, we're going to have a conference at 12 noon at the Stewart Center, but really, we want to see faces there, not just Black faces at that march, but everybody. And so again, we ask you to help to push it, to promote it, and come. I mean, the mega bus goes right to D.C. You got buses going all day long, in New York City. So it's important that people be there. And also, on Tuesday, November 7th, the chair of the Black is Back Coalition and also the chair of the African People's Socialist Party will be speaking in New York City. He's going to be speaking from 7 o'clock to 9 p.m. They're having something at the Vision Space in New York City, 566 7th Avenue, Suite 504. I have some information about this. The people who are sponsoring this are called the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, and their movement is about white solidarity with Black power, and they are calling for reparations. So I think it would be a very, very, very insightful and informative program for you to attend. It's going to be in New York City on November 7th. Oh, I'm sorry. Tuesday the 6th. Thank you, Dave. David is a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. Thank you. From Boston, so I thank you. So yeah, Tuesday, November 6th. So I invite everybody to be there. And just in wrapping it up, when I hear people talking about Barack Hussein Obama and AFRICOM, my position is that that's exactly why he was chosen to be president, for AFRICOM. It was no accident. Thank you so very much, brothers and sisters.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Bernadette Alorin, who is the national spokesperson of the U.S. chapter of Bayan, or Bayan USA, an alliance of 23 Filipino organizations across the U.S. representing workers, immigrants, youth, students, women, cultural workers, artists, and LGBTQ folks. Bayan is the main political center for the anti-imperialist mass movement in the Philippines and at the forefront of the struggle for national democracy with a socialist perspective. From 2009 to 2018, Alorin served as the chairperson of Bayan USA. Alorin is also a member of the International Coordinating Committee of the International League of People's Struggle, a global anti-imperialist and democratic formation of 300 members present in over 40 countries representing national and social liberation movements against imperialism and reaction. So welcome her. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to see my sisters in struggle, Juyeon from Korea and Hideko from Okinawa, my Asian sisters in struggle. I just want to remind everyone that the Asia Pacific region is a region we have to continuously pay attention to because it is, since the 20th century, remains the site of the largest global command of the U.S. Armed Forces, which is the Pacific Command, where you have the largest concentration of military bases and installations and presence in the world. So that being said, the Philippines is the largest recipient of U.S. military aid in the Asia-Pacific region. And when I say aid, I am referring to any funding, weaponry, technology that's used for Philippine military, Philippine National Police, and U.S. military operations in the country. Just to give some historical background, the Philippines was once a direct colony of the U.S. How many people here knew that? So, and now the Philippines is a neo-colony of the U.S. How many people here know that? Okay. So one agreement under the U.S. Pacific Command in the Philippines is the Mutual Defense Treaty. And there are MDTs with other countries as well. But the MDT in the Philippines was established in 1951 as a framework status of forces agreement under which there are many derivative agreements that basically allow for a permanent rotational presence of U.S. military in the country. So we may not have our permanent bases anymore, but because of these all other derivative agreements, the U.S. military can basically operate permanently, but with a rotational presence in over 20 ports all over the country. They have free access to. They also are annually there for counterterrorism exercises with the Philippine military. They're also supplying, just this year alone, the U.S. government has supplied much weaponry and technology to the Philippines, including the Raven and the Scan Eagle drones, which they do conduct drone warfare both for killing and also for surveillance. They also supply the Glock pistols, the M4 carbines, the grenade launchers, the operation gear, and the miniguns on the helicopters in the Philippines. The U.S. also supplies ships and rubber boats in the Philippines for the Philippine Marines and the Navy. They also supply aircrafts for the Philippine Air Force. So this is just. I'm not going to really focus on this. I will focus on the why. Why is the Philippines so militarized and militarized both by U.S. and also U.S. military aid? It's because it's the fifth most mineral-rich country in the world. It has over $1 trillion in untapped mineral, agricultural, and marine wealth. It's the regional food basket, so it supplies food. It feeds a lot of the region. It's also, because of this, it's strategic for U.S. geopolitics as it is situated right at the South China Sea. And it also has the longest running armed revolution in the region, including Islamicist armed groups, separatist groups in the region. But I want to call our attention more to why there is a long-standing armed revolution in the Philippines. And that's because the Philippines is rich, but the people are poor. And this is the story of many poor countries around the world. They're rich, but the people are poor. Just 11 days ago, in the Visayas, which is the central region of the Philippines, there was a massacre of 9 peasants, 9 sugar farmers that were affiliated with the union, by an affiliated union. And under Duterte, we know about this drug war. We know about the killings of so-called drug addicts in the urban centers. We don't really hear about the killings of farmers in the countryside. And under Duterte, there have been at least 13 massacres of farmers. And the militarization and the abuses in the countryside are very rarely make the news in comparison to the drug war. So these are also state-sanctioned killings under the Duterte regime. What you have to understand is that these killings are perpetrated by the Philippine military, who are funded by U.S. military aid. And in many poor countries, like the Philippines, there is a hacienda system. So the Philippines was once a colony of Spain, and Spain established a hacienda system, or a cash crop system, that the U.S. colonial government developed and maintained because it was a useful tool to keep the country subjugated. The 75% of the Philippine population are from the rural communities and live off the land, but all of them don't own the land that they till. They are beholden to a very small clique of landlord families that basically own all of the Philippines and work in collusion with big foreign national corporations. The Philippines is the 9th largest sugar producer in the world, and these farmers were killed in the sugar producing capital of the area of the Philippines. When we think about the armed revolution in the Philippines, we think about armed struggle. But really, the People's War in the Philippines, the main content of the People's War in the Philippines is not armed struggle. The main content of the People's War is agrarian revolution. And when we say agrarian revolution, we're talking about a broad spectrum of activities. It could, at the minimum, it's the struggle or campaign for lowering the tax on agricultural goods, as well as lowering the rent on land. And as far as actual land confiscation and occupation, by military, by armed force if needed. But we don't think about those things. We think about the armed struggle, which is important. But the peasantry, the farmers, the indigenous people are also struggling to protect and defend their lands, and for that they have to pay a very big price. And this is the story of many, many countries who have a hacienda system, especially in Latin and Central America, where the hacienda system literally keeps the country in a neo-colonial state. So this is at the center. This is at the center of the hunger question in the Philippines. This is the center of the hunger question in the whole world, the land question. And if you don't understand the land question in the Philippines, you will never understand the anti-imperialist struggle in the Philippines. You have to understand the land question first. And why there is an armed revolution in the country is because of the land question. And the people are raising arms to protect their land, to take their land back, and they're being killed for it. And this is another face of U.S.-led war and militarism that we need to also understand as anti-war and peace activists here in the U.S. So, these farmers were killed while they were resting. They were recultivating their idle land that was promised to them years ago during the Cory Aquino administration. This is back in the 80s. But because it was never implemented, there have been a series of fake agrarian reform bills that have passed, never genuine. They decided to take matters into their own hands and occupy the land themselves and recultivated it. It's funny because they're a Bayan-affiliated sugar farm workers union. For many years, they were accused of being NPA, New People's Army, by the government and by the military. But when these farmers were killed, it was the military that accused the NPA of being the ones to do it. So you see how this works, in the Philippines, that, we heard a story from a farmer who lost his son, and his wife was saying, they accused us of being NPA. Now they say the NPA is the one who did this to us. We want to speak to the NPA because we want to find the NPA now because we want to seek revolutionary justice. When you hear things like that, you can't help but be agitated and to cry because you see those who are being killed, those who are being oppressed in the countryside, who they are seeking for revolutionary justice and for support because they know who are the ones that are helping them. They know who are the ones that are killing them. All of this to say that we also need to support, as the struggle to cut U.S. military aid to the Philippines, the ongoing struggle to oust this current rotten dictator, Duterte in the country. Solidarity from the U.S. played a pivotal role in the ouster of two presidents in 1986 and in 2000. And it can happen again. We're hoping it can happen again next year. But the struggle to cut the aid is big. The struggle to get the U.S. military out of the Philippines is big. But we also need your solidarity for our national liberation struggle. For those of us in the front lines, the freedom fighters in the Philippines, in the cities and in the countryside, who are really at the front lines or are shedding blood, to protect the Philippines from imperialist aggression, and also who are paying the highest price for the revolutionary struggle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You didn't even make it to the 1 minute sign. Oh, yeah. That's great. Last but certainly not least, we have Ajamu Baraka, who is a longtime activist, geopolitical analyst, writer, and human rights defender. He is an editor and contributor, columnist for the Black Agenda Report, contributes to Counterpunch, Dissident, Voice, and a host of alternative news and information outlets. Ajamu is currently the national organizer for the Black Alliance for Peace and a member of the coordinating committee of the Black is Back Coalition and the administrative committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition. Let's welcome Ajamu.
Thank you, Sade. And thank all of you for coming out on this this evening, where you could be someplace in mask and and all kinds of things and running the streets and doing the stuff you do on Halloween, but you are here instead to talk about something very, very important for all of us. This issue of war and peace and imperialism. So this is the place to be, because we have to talk about what our responsibilities are, not only to the people in this country, but to the world. We have to talk about that because we have a primary responsibility to the people of the world. We are at the heart of empire, and we have heard tonight some of the consequences of empire. So we have to talk to people in this country about what is the only force that can put a brake on the activity, the behavior of empire that is responsible for the death and destruction of people globally. And that is the people here. So these kinds of conversations are absolutely necessary. We have a sense of what we have to do, but we have to make sure that we understand what our responsibility is at this current moment to engage the people of this country, to do what the two major parties are not doing, and that is to put front and center this issue of war and peace and the role of U.S. imperialism. Now, you know, we talk about peace, and peace is important. We all want to have peace. Any person who is a rational and moral human being would like to live in a society, live in a world in which we have peace and where people can develop and live in peace. But we recognize that there could be no peace without justice. That's why we recognize and we say quite clearly that we understand that we are at war. The war is being waged against the people of this planet. The war is being waged against the working class and poor here in this country. And we say that without struggle, there could be no peace. That basically, if we want peace, we have to fight for it. In order to fight for it, what do we have to do? We have to build more effective, powerful organizations. So that's why we're here tonight, to talk about what we have to do, what must be done. Brother Maurice talked about AFRICOM. We mentioned the fact that we have a new formation, the Black Alliance for Peace. We formed this particular organization, this alliance, so that we can, in fact, address the current challenge of the moment. We recognize that one of the most consistently anti-imperialist, anti-war community in this country for decades was and is the black community. But we saw that under the influence of Barack Hussein Obama as the first black president, that there was a very dramatic move to the right among the black community. That traditional opposition to war and imperialism has slipped. And we saw that for 8 years, there was that movement toward the right. Joe talked about the fact that the anti-war movement just about fell apart. That was a consequence of that influence. So what we saw when Barack Obama moved on, we saw an opportunity to rebuild that traditional opposition, an opportunity to organize the black community, to help to revive that traditional black internationalism, to recenter black opposition to imperialism, as part of our effort not only to organize ourselves, but to revive and to reorganize the broader anti-war movement. So we moved in April of 2017 to, in fact, do that. And we launched the Black Alliance for Peace. One of the major programs that we have just embarked on October the 1st, was a campaign to raise the awareness of the existence of AFRICOM, the U.S. Africa Command, to oppose that command. This campaign is part of a larger campaign that we helped to put in place back in January. Many of you are part of that process where we came together in January in Baltimore and we launched the coalition to close all U.S. foreign bases. AFRICOM is the sort of subsection of that campaign. We are focused on closing our U.S. Foreign bases, but we're taking a particular focus on AFRICOM. So we are part of this process of attempting to revive a powerful anti-war movement here in this country. We see the black community and the Black Alliance for Peace as being a fundamental part of that process. And we see that folks who are traditionally part of the left here in this country